We are now ready to move on to the superintendent's agenda items. For the record, let it be reflected, agenda item E1 is new, and items A3, I8, I9, K2, K3, K4, K5, K6, K7, K8, K9, K10, and K11, and their attachments are new. The attachments to I1 and K1 were revised. Board policy requires trustees to excuse themselves and abstain from all discussion and votes pertaining to contracts that might involve a conflict of interest. As defined in board policy, a conflict of interest is any circumstance that could cast doubt on a trustee's ability to act with total objectivity with regard to the district's interests. We will now consider items held for abstention and/or discussion. Each month, all action items begin on the consent agenda. If a trustee would like an item held from consent, they need to notify the district chief of staff, Sylvia Tran, by 8:00 a.m. on the Monday prior to the voting meeting. As a reminder, trustees, everyone had an opportunity prior to this meeting to submit additional questions after agenda review to the administration. The Q&A document has been updated to reflect the additional questions. The updated Q&A was sent to all trustees and has been posted on the district website. The trustees requested the following items to be held from the consent agenda: A3, D1, F1, F6, I1, I3, I4, I5, I6, I7, I9. K1, I will also entertain a motion to return agenda items F1, F6, I3, I5, and I6 back to the consent agenda. These had been held at the request of Trustee Santos. Trustee Santos, it is my understanding that you no longer want these items pulled from the consent. Is that correct?
That's correct.
May I have a motion?
Can you repeat those again? I7, I1A, and make sure that we keep I7, I1A, and that's it. That's all I have.
That's what we have.
And everything else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, could you name those again? We're voting to return those to consent?
Yes. You don't have your paper?
Oh, on here.
May I have a motion?
I move to return agenda items F1, F6, I3, I5, and I6 back to the consent agenda.
Second.
Are there any comments? I need to go back and read. Go ahead and take this vote. Go ahead and take the vote? Okay. Are there any comments or questions from my colleagues? Please vote.
Did she say A3?
8-4, 0 against. For legal reasons, I need to go back and read I-9. Approval of resolution of the Board of Education on the Houston Independent School District authorizing the superintendent of schools to negotiate and execute COVID-19 related contracts valued at or above $100,000. Colleagues, please note that this item is new and has been added after agenda review, and administration is recommending that this item be pulled and considered at next week's hearing so that my colleagues can have time to review and ask questions. If there are no objections, I'm directing the administration to place this item on the agenda for next week. Seeing no objections, moving on now to the remaining items being held for discussion. For each item held, we will do 2 rounds of 2 minutes each. If an additional round is desired, that can be done with a motion, second, and board vote. Our first item held for discussion is A3, approval of the resolution expressing support from the Board of Education for the superintendent's decision to mandate wearing of masks at district facilities and on district buses. May I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Our next item held for discussion is agenda item D1, authority to renew partnerships with.
They forgot to give you that, and just, are there any questions and comments from my colleague? They forgot to add it there.
Okay, then, okay. I need to go back to the A3, approval of the resolution that is expressing support We had a motion and a second. Do I have any comments or questions from my colleagues? Please put your name in the queue if you have a question or a comment.
I'm in the queue.
Trustee Cruz?
Thank you. Would it be possible to allow the students who thought that they were going to be able to speak virtually to speak? This agenda item?
Trustee Cruz, do you want to make a motion?
I move that we allow student speakers who had signed up to speak and thought they were going to speak virtually to be called so that they can share their comments on this agenda item.
Second, Santos.
Please vote. Eight, 4, 0 against. We will see if we're able to contact those students.
Okay, and I do have a comment. Well, can I go ahead with my time?
Yes.
Thank you, President Allen. I applaud our superintendent for stepping up and doing the right thing. I fully support keeping our students and staff safe. Thank you to all of you who have sent emails. I'm unable to respond to all of them, but I do appreciate everyone that has reached out, whether or not we agree. I would like our district to also consider a vaccine mandate for those that qualify, and also
I know that she froze, but I do need to make a comment about the motion that we did earlier and voted on. We don't have the phone numbers to call those students, so if the students would please call in.
Or we need to take, we need to go to the next item so that she can look up all their phone numbers.
And we're going to go to the next item so that she can look up all the student phone numbers. We're going to wait on, any other comments? Trustee Guidry? We're on A3.
Thank you, President Allen. And I ditto my colleague Cruz, Trustee Cruz, on this matter with respect to thanking the superintendent. I do stand with you, sir, with respect to this item. I have a question, though, and I see here that you are going to continue to monitor this, and so is it possible that this item will come up again once we move from a red and go down to a yellow and potentially have the mandate removed? That's my first question. My second question would be with respect to contact tracing. Is that something we're going to consider as a school, a district as well?
Yes to both. Our focus is to keep a close eye on the data, work with the health professionals, ensure that we're making the most informed decisions. Our hope is that the data continues to head or starts to head in the right direction, so this can be as temporary as possible. Your second portion of the question will be addressed in our release of the Get Ready, Set, Go plan, the updates are very detailed, that talk about contact tracing. I was going to talk about in my superintendent's report at the end.
Thank you.
Trustee Bluefer Daniels?
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to say, as it relates to A3, there is no right decision. Somebody's going to be on the opposite side of whatever decision we make, whichever way we align our support. And as a mother, grandmother, auntie, etc., our children are our greatest accomplishment, our greatest loves. And so we'll do everything we can to keep our children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews safe. And with that being said, that's the most important asset. But so are the teachers, bus drivers, support staff, cafeteria workers, to their families. So I will be voting with the understanding, I hope you all understand that I will be voting from a perspective of what is best for our children and the staff. We just cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want our children in a learning environment. We know that that's most important for them right now, particularly as we talked about the difference in the black and brown learning ability, or a learning achievement, I should say. So we need our children in the classroom. That's most important. And so I will be voting in support of whatever decision the superintendent decides.
Trustee Song?
Superintendent House, thank you so much for very rapidly upon your arrival here, getting educated on Houston, getting educated on pandemic health, and for bringing forward this decision for us to support this evening. You said a week ago, if we can save one life, then this is what we should do. And people have written to us by the hundreds. I have read every single email that was sent to me. I'm sorry I didn't reply to every single one, but I did read every single email that was sent to me. And I heard the stories of immune-compromised teachers who are scared to go back into classrooms with this new variant. I heard the stories of bus drivers who are concerned about the family member at home. I heard parents speaking about their young children who aren't vaccinated and their worry for their little infants, that they'll be coming home to their siblings. And so, and children who live with their grandparents, right? These are the lives that could be saved. These are the lives that might not be intubated and airlifted from the ICU, as we heard a doctor say tonight. The medical professionals who came here tonight are drowning right now. We are code red in Houston, and we need to be part of the public health solution. So I'm honored to support this step. Mr. House, thank you for your leadership on this. I'm very empathetic to those who spoke against this as well. I understand. Thank you for sharing your stories with me, and I hope that we can have a thoughtful approach to working with children who may have medical circumstances that prevent them from being comfortable keeping a mask on for many hours in a day. Thank you.
Trustee Dygard?
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent House, for your leadership to protect the health of our kids and to take measures to ensure that our students have as consistent a learning environment as possible during these unprecedented times. While this is an administrative decision and you have the full authority to implement the requirement of masks without a vote by this board, you do have my full support for this measure. Over this past week, I've received an unprecedented number of emails, more than I have for any other issue that's ever come before me, and I also have read every single one of them, but without staff as a volunteer, it's hard to respond to every one of them, but I do appreciate the multitude of perspectives that were presented about this issue. The overwhelming majority of my emails that I received were from parents who support requiring masks, pleading us to keep their precious children safe from an evolving health crisis that is starting to disproportionately impact children who are not yet eligible for that vaccine. And among those letters was from a single mom who is immunocompromised and is fearful over who will raise her child if she gets sick with COVID. But I didn't just hear from parents, as we also heard tonight, I heard from a lot of doctors who are treating children with COVID, imploring us to do this simple thing to mitigate the health consequences of this virus on our young patients. Can I have 30 more seconds? Well, what our children need above all else this year is as stable of a learning environment as we can possibly provide. If there is a revolving door of sick kids in the classes, their learning is interrupted. If teachers are out sick and the students have a sub, their learning is interrupted. Our kids cannot afford any more disruptions in their learning, and if requiring masks to mitigate that disruption, then it is our obligation as an institution of learning to do so. On a personal note, my own child is a student in HISD, and I wouldn't support anything for anyone else's child that I wouldn't be okay with for my own child. I also spend several times a week at a physical therapy center that is part of one of our prominent health centers, and when they lift their mask requirement, I will feel safe lifting ours.
Trustee Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. House, for stepping up and putting this item on our agenda in accordance with the HISD's #1 mission to keep students safe first, keep our staff safe. I think that this is the right decision for for Harris County. This issue is not a political issue. This is to keep our county safe. I want to thank also the Harris County officials, including Lina Hidalgo, for supporting us in this endeavor. And I hope that once we start school, everyone stays safe, puts their mask on, covers their nose, and we don't have issues with students being sick. We're able to teach our students, keep them in schools, because that's what we're here to do.
Trustee Santos.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, Superintendent House. Your leadership has been incredibly needed at this time and refreshing and absolutely welcomed. Safety is our #1 priority. This is an issue of public health. It is not something to politicize. And I want to say that this isn't an act of civil disobedience. This is a need to keep our kids safe. Experts sought us out. We had an overwhelming number of emails that I'd never seen before, like Trustee Dygard said, but I'm gonna just take this up a notch. I felt scared tonight. I am a new mom. I gave up a job so I could stay home and take care of my son during COVID. And tonight was difficult. It was difficult to be in a room where I was thinking people don't care about my son and what I bring home to him and that he might suffer. And I know that there are new moms out there that are teaching our children. There are teachers out there that have to go home, have to face our children every day and think, what are we bringing home to our families? Our custodial staff that goes in and cleans up after our kids, that we, like Trustee Bluford Daniels said, have to think about those lives that are precious to their family. And again, if it keeps one life safe, or if it keeps a teacher feeling comfort that they're not going to bring anything home to their family, I will support this. So thank you again, Superintendent House and this board, for making these difficult decisions for our kids. Thank you.
Trustee Cruz.
Thank you. Sorry, I froze there. I just wanted to finish one statement, and then I wanted to read Trustee Flynn Villaseca had a quick statement too. So again, I support a vaccine mandate if that's what our district decides to do. I feel like this is the right thing to do, but we shouldn't put all of the responsibility just on our children. Trustee Flynn Villaseca says, I'm in full support of the mask mandate. Our students need to be back in the classroom, and we need to provide a safe environment for our students, teachers, and staff. Thank you.
And as I wanted to say that the overwhelming majority of District 4 voiced their support of Mr. House's mask mandate. Therefore, I will follow suit as I serve our area. And of course, HISD longtime core value has always been safety above all else. Thank you. Have we reached any kids yet? Any of the students? What about the person in waiting? Okay. Please vote. Eight for, 0 against. Our next item held for discussion is Agenda Item D1, authority to renew partnerships with Avanti Houston Incorporated, Gulf Coast Community Services Association, Harris County Department of Education, and Baker Ripley for Head Start pre-kindergarten collaborative programs. This item is being held at the request of Trustee Hernandez. May I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Are there any questions? Trustee Hernandez?
My question was answered on this already. I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Seeing no one else in the queue? Please vote. Eight for, 0 against. Our next item held for discussion is Agenda Item I1, approval of vendor awards for purchases over $100,000 and ratification of vendor awards for purchases under $100,000 for 210410 RFP body-worn cameras, tasers, and law enforcement software. This item is being held at the request of Trustee Cruz and Hernandez. May I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any comments? Trustee Cruz?
Thank you. I do not support arming officers that are in our schools and giving them anything that could potentially harm our students. We still have not addressed any of the recommendations that were brought forward to us by One Houston. We approved a board policy last week for first reading, FFBA local, where in the executive summary it states the district has already taken the following action: champion the use of restorative practices, and restorative discipline is a primary method of addressing student discipline. This contradicts the use of tasers. Thank you to the administration for the additional information provided to the board in the Q&A, or we were not provided with any data to support why our officers need tasers. Thank you.
Trustee Hernandez?
Thank you, Trustee Allen. I know that I had a question last board meeting about presenting data about why we are severely in need of tasers. I know that I read the Q&A about how there was 10 tasers purchased in 2018, and I saw data around what HISD police officers are doing or were doing this school year, but that was not data that supported why we are in severe need of tasers. Does somebody have any more data to support that?
I don't know that we have more data, but what I will say is that tasers are not specifically for use of just our children. We've had a situation just in the last week that spoke to a situation where a individual off of one of our campuses put themselves in a very difficult situation. And because of the use of taser, we were able to subdue that individual from hurting himself. So it's not just about our students, it's about public safety as a whole. And someone mentioned the word restorative justice. In my conversations with Chief Lopez, we've talked about, and Chief Lopez, you're more than welcome to come up and make comment on this. There is extensive training and focus right now being pushed with our police department around restorative justice, around the idea of ensuring that we meet our kids where they are versus the idea of, of moving too quick to assume that, that they're individuals that are dangerous. Chief Lopez?
Will not be issued to campus officers. They only be issued to patrol officers who have a higher propensity to encounter individuals who are a little bit more dangerous than the persons they encounter on campus. Like Mr. House said, the other day we had 2 officers on patrol who were flagged down in regards to 2 suspects who had stabbed each other. So they immediately took action and subdued the suspects without the use of a taser. Another example is when we had 2 patrol officers were flagged down by a mother who was trying to control her adult son, who was obviously under some type of mental distress. The mother was pleading with the officers to help her. So the officers intervened, tried to take custody of the adult. The adult's about 19, 20 years old. And he pulled away from the officers and attempted to run into the street and almost got hit by cars. The officers had to tase the individual in order to subdue him and try to stop him from running to the street. And in 3 years, that's the first and only time that officers have used a taser since they've been issued. Again, they're only going to be issued to patrol officers, not campus officers. And again, part of the training, if this item is approved, is that they receive de-escalation training. They're not going to be issued a taser and just sent out on the street. 80% of the training that officers will receive when they receive their taser is verbal de-escalation training. We also have a virtual reality component where they're outfitted with a virtual reality headset like they have at Best Buy, and they go through certain scenarios, and they encounter people who have autistic problems. They encounter people who's going under mental distress. They encounter people who has domestic violence issues, and those scenarios help them prepare to either make a decision to use the taser or not use the taser. And after we finish that training, we're going to do annual recertification training. It's not one and done. So I believe the policies we currently have in place, it suffice, and it gives me enough supervisory oversight to make sure the officers are following the directive, following district policy, and most importantly, following the law and not violating persons' civil rights. And it's a question of the danger. I want to increase my officer's chance of surviving out there on the street, and an officer is given options instead of only having a baton, only having and their weapon. That's the only 2 options they have. If we give them the secondary option, it increases officer safety, and it also increases the safety of the citizen, because they don't have to resort to using their firearm or a baton. And in my 34 years in law enforcement, I've never seen a use of force that looks pretty. Every use of force looks bad, whether it's restraining somebody by their arm or taking somebody down, pepper spray, or baton. But what I know is that the taser causes less harm to a person than a baton or a firearm, obviously.
Yep, and I do want to remind all trustee members that, as Chief Lopez indicated, this is for our patrol, not our campus-based officers. I think that's important to the examples that he shared this evening. The 2 examples were examples while officers were on patrol. And as we think about this moving forward, we have to understand that what's the next step in the 2 situations that he talked about? What would be the next step if a taser was not in the hands of those particular patrol members? I don't know. He could have successfully tackled the individual, but we know where we don't want to go. And I think that's extremely important to all of us, to that mother that had that son that had some mental health issues. We don't know what that would have looked like, but it ended in a much better place than it could have ended like we've seen across the country.
Okay, I also want to make a comment on this issue.
I'm not done.
Yes, ma'am.
So did I hear you correctly that 3 years that we've owned, the district has owned tasers, they have been deployed one time?
Yes, ma'am. And just recently, within the last 2 weeks.
Okay, so for me, that as a school district, educating kids and definitely in a budget deficit. The data does not support spending. I don't know what the actual amount for the tasers is. I don't think the data supports that and that amount of spending for tasers, because one time in 3 years is not a lot of time, right? And for us to go and buy 42 more seems like there isn't necessarily a reason behind that. I know that we had previous questions about pepper spray as well. Can you also state the policy on pepper spray for students?
That's not part of the vendor list.
The policy on pepper spray on the students is very similar to the tasers. Pepper spray will not be utilized on students under 10 years old. I believe I provided the data to Trustee Sung back in May or June. And in a 10-year period, we deployed pepper spray about 24, 25 times. Don't hold me to that number. In a 10-year period to the on campus. And so it still has the same policies as CED. Anytime we call it intermediate weapon is deployed, whether it's a baton, pepper spray, or a taser, they have to write a report. It has to be documented. We do a use of force analysis to make sure the officer acted within the directives of the department. And if they're not, we go ahead and take corrective action to make sure it doesn't happen again. So it's the same policy as as the tasers. But if I could point out that, yes, we don't have the data to support, but you also have to look at the data when we have our officers on night shift, on the evening shift, responding to these burglaries. It is not by the grace of God that they encounter these suspects in our buildings and our facilities, and they're by themselves. And by the grace of God, they got through it with no problems, no issues. But all it do is takes one time for one of our officers to be killed or injured. And I just want to give them an option to help balance that out. Another option besides a firearm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I would also like to comment on this issue. I know that you said that this would be with the patrol officers, and tasers would not be on campus. But I would also like to say that tasers were alternatives to guns. And if I can save a life, it's worth it. If they don't have the tasers, the other alternative is to shoot someone with a bullet. And like I said before, if I can save a life, it's worth it. So a taser for me would be worth it. Next in the queue is Trustee Bluford Daniels.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. House, if I may address Chief with a couple of questions. And first, let me preface this by saying, and you all have heard this from me, and you probably hear it again, I am that parent that goes to the cemetery to visit their son. I go to the graveyard. We talked about the mask, keeping the children safe, and so now we've heard, if I could save one life, well, let me tell you, if I could give $1 million back to save my son's life, I would do that. And any of you as parents and grandparents and do not want to walk a knee size 8.5s. Most of you couldn't do it. And Chief mentioned that there's been one instance of utilizing the taser in 3 years. Dr. Allen mentioned the recourse of not utilizing the table. Let's be realistic. And you have Facebook accounts. We see the media with mothers howling, not crying, howling. Why did you shoot my son? You could have tased him. Why did you shoot my daughter? You could have tased him. If that's an alternative, for someone to still be here and not have to go and visit the cemetery like those of us do, then I would rather support that. I've said it over and over again. There are women in my circle whose sons and daughters or family members have been killed by police officers. So I'm not a drum major, but I am a drum major for keeping our kids, our teachers, our campuses safe. If for no other reason, Anything, you need a net? If you're asking for tasers, then you need a net too? Because whatever it takes for our children and grandchildren to go into a campus and have the curriculums and come home. Anything between those hours that I can work on as a parent and grandmother. But the most important thing is I want my child to leave out the door after he have his Cheerios and come back home in the evening to get his peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Thank you.
Trustee Guidry?
Thank you, President Allen. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the tasers, but what I've noticed in this agenda, in this purchase order, we also have body-worn cameras. So how many of the officers have body cameras right now, and do you have a number you're anticipating purchasing for the future?
Yes, ma'am. We, all our patrol officers and campus officers issue body-worn cameras. Currently, we have about 225 cameras, and those are necessary. It's not a luxury anymore, especially in this day and age. We need a body-worn cameras to capture our activities, because God forbid we have an unfortunate incident, a shooting, or bad use of force, and we don't have video to show to the public to prove that the officers were in the right or prove that they did wrong. You know, we've been in a whole lot of trouble, and we're going to open the districts to a lot of liability.
So that is another item that's on this purchase
Yes, ma'am.
order. And the other item would be law enforcement software. Could you give us some information on that?
There's two pieces of software. It's the computer-aided dispatch system. And that's where the dispatchers work and dispatch officers to the field, to wherever call they have to go. This is when the citizens, the administrators, the campus, call into the police department, and we capture that information and dispatch officers, so we have an official record. The report, RMS, the report management system, is the actual system where they join with the CAD, and where the officers write the report, they conduct investigations, they collect evidence, whether it's physical or digital evidence. And those two systems are near the end of life cycle for hardware and support. And so we need, and it wasn't implemented to the likeness that I want, because right now, if you were to ask me to provide a report on how many incidents happened at Sam Houston High School involving an assault with a gun, I have to do that manually. I can pull the data down, but I have to export it to an Excel spreadsheet and then manually look at the data and analyze it. A perfect example is the use of force report that I provided Trustee Sung a few months ago. Well, a properly configured CAD RMS system will allow me to pull that data electronically. Right now, we do it manually. So it takes a lot of work to pull all that data, analyze it, and then provide the report.
So this equipment would make you more efficient, basically, is what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am. It will allow me to deploy resources to the right schools. Because right now, we deploy officers and assign officers to schools based on historical data and somebody's opinion. We know something happened at North Forest 2 years ago, so we're going to put 3 officers there. Even though we might not need 3 officers, we might need 3 officers at another school. I don't have that data to support how many calls for service is going to North Forest, how many calls for service is going to our middle schools. So this system will allow us to pull that data so I can make better management decisions to deploy officers to where they need it the most.
Thank you, because my point is, we've spent a lot of time talking about tasers, but that's not the only thing on this purchase
No,
order.
the Taser is about 20% of this project.
Thank you so much, sir.
Trustee Santos?
Thank you, and Superintendent House and Chief Lopez, I know you're relatively new, and I think what you're hearing here is kind of the spillover or non-closure that we've had with not being able to set our goals around the police committee, and having each individual trustee contribute to that conversation as robustly as we would like. It's a chicken versus egg issue right now. Like, just because it's public policy doesn't mean it's right. And if we invested those $950,000 into crayons, that would mean that's almost 2 million crayons for our kids, right? Or almost 200,000 copies of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. We'd invest in our kindergartners, as opposed to having to go out and get tasers and software. The software and the body cams are a little more justifiable for me to vote on. I just cannot, in good conscience, after giving the police department $30 million last year and having our teachers watching our teachers beg for money on social media to fund their classrooms, this is a bit disturbing for this trustee to vote on, particularly when it's surrounding an issue that we have not broached as a society yet in a meaningful way. So it's not, I'm just trying to give y'all some context as to why we are having this conversation tonight. So my question is, what is the cost for just the 42 tasers alone?
It's approximately 180,000.
Okay, and so I have two questions, Chief
I'm sorry.
Lopez.
Alexis can answer.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Trustee Santos, did you want to finish your question?
Yes, so it's, what is the cost for just the tasers alone?
So the tasers would make up, depending on how many tasers that they would need to purchase, the tasers would make up anywhere from, over the lifetime of the contract, about $95,000 to about $142,000 over the lifetime of the contract.
Okay, so we're asking for 42 tasers today, Chief Lopez?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's 100 and what?
Over the lifetime, over the 5 years of the contract, about $95,000 to $142,000.
150,000. Okay, so if we were to separate the tasers from this agenda item until we can have a more robust conversation around the goal of this board moving forward with the district, what would that look like today?
So I know that in agenda review that I said that we could separate. So Lisa, here's what the problem is. When we issued this solicitation, as Trustee Guidry just said, there are more components to this. So we did 4 market baskets in this solicitation.
Ms. Licata, can you speak up just a little bit, please?
Yes. Can you hear me better? Okay. So as Trustee Guidry said, there are 4 market baskets in this solicitation. There was the CAD, there's the RMS, there are the body cameras, and there are the tasers. There is no way to separate out the tasers because the recommended vendor, or one of these recommended vendors, also responded to the remaining 3 market baskets. So we can't pull that vendor out because then they wouldn't be eligible to purchase the other 3 market baskets from.
I think what I'm hearing is the way that this was placed out for solicitation and the way people responded was all of these things together. That's the project.
It was all, you could respond to 1, 2, 3, or all 4 market baskets. Only one vendor responded for tasers, but that one vendor also responded to the remaining 3 market baskets.
Okay, so I'm hearing from the administration that it would be difficult to separate it
Okay.
out.
So
would
then-
it be, is there a timeline on this particular project that needs to be accomplished or needs to be voted on tonight?
So yes, for the CAD, for the remaining 3 market baskets, yes. The only thing that we could do is, should this pass, we would just not, if you would make a motion, I suppose, to separate out and say that I'm not going to approve tasers in this dollar amount, then the procurement department would just not issue any purchase orders for tasers to that approved vendor.
And so could you provide to the administration the recommended language for the motion so that we're clear for the minutes?
Sure. So should you choose, Trustee Santos, to make a motion, it would be to make a motion for the purchasing department to, I guess it would be a 2-part motion. 1, that no shopping cart would be entered
For the tasers.
for the tasers, and then 2, the motion would be that the purchasing department would not issue a purchase order to the vendor for tasers.
Okay, so would that dollar amount change on the agenda item?
So the dollar amount could change, but I mean, just keep in mind, I mean, this is just a not to exceed amount. I mean, you could make a recommendation to change the dollar amount. That's up to you, but I suppose should down the line, additional body cameras need to be serviced or purchased, so it's up to you whether you want to change the dollar amount.
Okay, Ms. Licata, it's this board member's preference to not move forward with the tasers. However, I do not want to discount the voice of my colleagues here. If we could either, and here was my second question was, could we delay the vote until we have the police committee meeting? But you're saying that it'll affect the
other
RFP.
3 market baskets in this solicitation.
Okay. And if we moved it back a week, would it still?
If-
effect?
If what? I'm sorry?
If we moved it back until the 19th?
If we pushed it back 1 week, I think that would be okay.
It doesn't really matter because the conversation wouldn't change. Donnie and Judith, I was hearing some objections from y'all. Is there, just put it up for the vote? Is that what I'm getting from y'all? Well, I'm,
Trustee Song?
oh, I'm sorry.
Most of my questions have been asked. I did have one remaining question. So, trustees were provided in our folders today, along with the Q&A, the policy for use of tasers. And it's somewhere among the papers I have here. Could you explain to me what exigent circumstances means in that policy, please? On page 3.
An example.
Exigent circumstances, yes.
An example would be, say that a patrol officer is out on the response to a campus, and then he or she gets involved in a situation where that officer is disarmed, and the only other option he has or she has is to use a taser. That would be exigent circumstances.
Okay, so there's a list. The officers should not use CED on a person, who is only passively resisting, handcuffed, known to be mentally ill, pregnant, elderly, visibly frail, or on young children. But if the circumstance you just described were to arise, they could still use it on.
Yes, ma'am. Because at that time it would be a matter of life and death. Because an officer still had, like any other person, they want to protect themselves.
Okay,
And just because the policy says thou shalt not, and it's exigent circumstances.
okay. And then I don't see on this list where we have any policy against using a taser on a student. Is there anything that I
Yes,
missed in this policy?
If you look at number 2
Yes,
and letter F
yes.
on young children,
Young children, what is the definition of young children?
this is a child under 10 years old in most cases.
10 years old.
Yes.
So this could be used on children between the ages of 11 and 17 then?
If exigent circumstances exist. My officers, we spend a lot of time working with SEL for the past 2 years. Recently, we finished training with SEL at Warden High School last week, where we're taking a lot more time in developing our de-escalation techniques and being a little bit more patient and going through the same type of training that our counselors are going through so we can understand how adolescents behave. A perfect example is that I always tell them that when you enter a scene and it's not non-law enforcement purpose, wait until the child reaches that peak and engage him after he comes down or she comes down. Don't engage him when at that peak, because that's going to lead to a possibly incident of use of force. So we partner with SCL, with Dr. Scott and her team on a yearly basis since last year, since I've been here. And that training continues to this day.
Okay, thank you. And then in this policy, there's nothing that specifically mentions patrol officers versus campus-based officers.
Because it applies to everyone, but the only ones that's going to be issued tasers are patrol officers. There's no officers assigned to the campus are going to be issued a taser.
Okay. I'd like to move that we separate this project, 210410 from item I1. and
Second.
vote separately. I move that we divide this from the full I1 item.
Okay, we have a
I think
motion.
it is already.
Have a motion and a second to.
Yeah.
Are you sure? Okay.
You're only considering this project, right?
Wait,
Okay, got
no.
it.
I have a second project to consider as well. I thought we pulled all of I-1E.
I thought so too. No?
It wasn't just a specific job number. That it was all of
Yes,
I-1E.
no, this is just for
It's already divided. Okay, then.
21-04-10.
Just for that project number.
Okay,
Just for
then,
this
thank you.
project number.
Okay, then I'll have a,
Okay, then I'm done. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any comments or questions? Please vote. Then we have.
Sorry, the motion doesn't apply, it's not,
Separation.
it was already separated, so we.
It's already
Sorry.
separated. So are you done with people speaking to this item and are you ready to call for the vote, or are there more people in the queue?
There's more people in the queue.
So continue with your queue, because I don't think trustee Song wants to make that motion, because the only thing that's on the table right now is this specific project. The balance of I is on your consent agenda.
Okay. Oh, who was next? We're starting round 2. Trustee Hernandez?
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for Chief Lopez. Did you mention that all of our police officers currently have body-worn cameras?
Yes, ma'am.
And so what is the purpose of adding more body-worn cameras?
This is to replace our current system, which is really not functioning as it should. It needs to be upgraded. A perfect example is our current vendor does not allow us to redact a child's face when we submit video to the DA's Office of Evidence, and it's very important to protect the privacy of our children. A new vendor, the new technology is that you have that ability to redact faces from videos, and we can send those videos digitally. Our current system also, we have 3 in-car camera systems, 3 separate companies, and all 3 companies are non-functional. So we have 0 capabilities to record videos from our patrol cars. Another issue with our current vendor is that it's server-based. And right now, we're about 93% full capacity on our server. And since all our videos are law enforcement related and we have to retain those videos for a certain period of time, we can't just erase that video and erase over that video and more information to the server. So with the new system, it allows us to, it's cloud-based, so it's gonna cost us less money in the long run. We don't have to buy server space. The only thing we're buying is hardware and then the software to run the cameras in the background. It's a very simple system, it's cleaner. It allows us to submit and track digital evidence easier through an internet link and secure, and it doesn't compromise the integrity of the video. So there's no way to manipulate the video and open that up to a defense concern. So technology has changed since 2017. I think they got that new system. So the new body-worn camera system will allow us to do all those things that a modern professional police agency requires in this day and age, especially the cloud-based. And if I could point out, if I could take a second, Trustee Hernandez, I forgot to mention about the CAD. A big issue I have with our computer-aided dispatch system is that right now, if we had a hurricane or natural disaster and we lose everything at the police headquarters, I have no backup system to dispatch my officers. With this new CAD system and the RMS, everything is cloud-based. So we could essentially work off our cell phone on an app or on a laptop. As long as we have internet connection, we could still function as a police department and communicate with officers out in the field and deploy them wherever we need them, wherever the emergency exists.
Okay, for a clarification, when you are, the new body-worn cameras that you're buying have to go with this new CAD system. They work together.
They work together,
And that's
yes,
why you
ma'am. Yes.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Trustee Bluefer Daniels? Trustee Guidry?
Actually, my question was answered. Thank you so much.
Needs to go cloud-based.
Trustee Santos? Trustee Cruz?
So this money that we would be approving to spend, what function is it currently under?
53?
Okay, can you tell me what that is? I don't have the numbers memorized.
I don't know, Glenn told me, Glenn.
Okay, so if we, let's say, if we were to not approve it, where would that money be spent instead?
Same.
Did you hear him? Same function, he said.
Yeah.
Okay. So would it be able to be used for another function?
It's in the police department budget, and it's 52, not 53, sorry. But it'd be in the same function. It's in the same department.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Trustee Santos? Oh.
Thank you, President Allen and Mr. House and Mr. Lopez. So I can see the need for the software. I can absolutely see the need for the body cams. My point was just that, what are we going to invest in? Are we going to invest in readers? Or are we going to invest into the school to prison pipeline? And that's what my point was earlier. So I am going to ask my colleagues, because this doesn't seem like it's going to pass. I don't know, but would you all consider? Well, I could just make the. What do you think? Just make a motion. Okay, I'm going to make the motion then. So I am going to move that we. Alexis, what was that language again?
So the motion should be you make a move that no shopping carts will be entered to purchase tasers, and the purchasing department will not issue a purchase order to the vendor for tasers.
Write it down.
That you don't spend money on tasers.
No purchase order.
I guess an easier amendment would just be that no purchase orders will be issued.
Okay, so if we voted this down, it's still under function 52, so you can bring it back again, right?
But we would, yes, but it would be brought back the same way.
Right, okay. I know, that's what I was just gonna move. Lisa, guidance? I'm just gonna vote it down. But the money's already allocated, so it's not.
Exactly.
What happens
Trustee
if?
Guidry?
So, Ms. Okada, you said earlier that this vendor was the only vendor that had an option for all 4 of the bucket items?
No, the way that we issued the solicitation was that anybody responding to the solicitation could respond to 1, 2, 3, or all 4 market baskets.
Okay.
On the 4 vendors that we are recommending tonight for approval, only one of the 4 is to purchase tasers from. The other 3 did not. We're not recommending them for tasers.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I just move that we go ahead and vote on it. I call the question.
Second.
Please vote.
Make a motion.
We are voting on the item as is. I-1. Three, 4, 5 against. Our next item held for discussion is agenda item I-4, approval of the August general fund budget amendment. This item is being held at the request of trustees Cruz, Hernandez, and Dygard. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second? Trustee Cruz?
Yeah, I had submitted a question and it was answered in the Q&A, but I just wanted a little more clarification in terms of, and it was asked on my behalf last week, so thank you for the my colleague that read the question. But essentially, we're spending less on instruction. And Chief Reed, I heard you say that the principals are the ones that make the decision, and so the money's shifted. I'm just trying to understand how, I guess I just don't understand why we would be spending less on instruction.
Again, principals have the ability to go in the system and just move funds between the different functions, so it is their decision. And it happens throughout the year. I mean, as you all saw last year, we move functions back and forth. So, I mean, they have that decision. They don't come through the budget office, and they don't have to, necessarily tell us what it is they're specifically doing. But if they need to move money out of function 11 in supplies, and they need to move it into function 13 for some professional development or for some travel for their teachers, then they have the ability to go in and move it.
So what is considered instruction? Salaries?
No, instruction is a purpose. So instruction means it is for classroom instruction. So it could be a teacher salary, a teacher aide salary, but it could be supplies for the classroom. It could be tutoring. It could be extra duty pay for the classroom. So it means it's for instruction. When I mentioned function 13 just a minute ago, that's professional development. So if they decided, okay, we're going to move it from 11 to function 13 because we're going to send a teacher or a group of teachers for some professional development, then they have to move it to that particular function because it's no longer directly classroom, it's now professional development. Same thing if they need to move money to, say, buy some nursing supplies, right? They may have had the supplies in function 11, they need to put some more into function 33 for health and medical. They need to buy some additional supplies for their nurse, right? They're able to make those adjustments, just like Mr. House talked about amendments to ESSER. Right, so as things change, as principals get more information or their needs change, they're able to go in and amend their budget by moving things between functions.
Okay. And then an additional question that's I've already asked, but I want to make sure I understand. So carryover expenses. So you're saying if there's any additional, I'm reading from the Q&A, this is on page 4. So if there's any additional carryover expenses, what I understand from reading this, they would not come out of the fund balance. Is that correct?
Yeah, carryover isn't a fund balance item. It's budget dollars that were already in 2021 that have commitments that we're bringing over because we're paying for them in 21-22.
So the money is essentially already allocated?
Yes, it is.
I just want to make sure I understand.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Hernandez?
That mostly answered my question. So you can add some of these two functions together and they would essentially equal.
Well, if you look at the bottom of that entire column, it's 0. Right, so that's why we call them budget neutral transfers, because it's all just pluses and minuses. It does not increase the total budget or decrease the total budget. It's just moving between functions.
Yes, however, like curriculum and instructional leadership, they essentially both add up to instruction.
Well, it doesn't roll up to instruction. Each different function has a different purpose.
They are both directly affecting students.
Well, so like function 23 is the principal's office. All right, so that is still school-based, right? That's the principal, that's his office. His overall primary purpose is supporting instruction, right? But function 11 is directly in the classroom. That's the purpose of function 11. It is tied directly to classroom instruction. Function 23 supports instruction, right? That's the school administration, right?
Okay, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Trustee Dygard?
Thank you. I have follow-up questions to page 4 of the Q&A document. Well, actually, it starts on the bottom of page 3, ends on the top of page 4. So am I correct in my understanding that with the exception of function 41 and 53, all of these changes were made at the campus level? With regards to function 11. So any decreases in function 11 appropriations happened at the campus level exclusively?
Most of them were. There may have been some departments, some of the academic departments do have some function 11 expenditures, but the vast majority, yes, for campuses.
Are you able to tell me of this $2.2 million, what percentage of that was reallocated at the campus level and what percentage was reallocated at the non-campus level?
I can. We'll have to dig into that, but yes, we can.
Okay. And then my next question is, so the way that the Q&A document is presented, that function 41 was primarily a move from function 53 technology to function 41 miscellaneous, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Help me understand that, because both of those were functions that increased. Function 53 didn't decrease.
Well, that meant function 53 did have other increases.
Okay, so for example, function 41, general administration, what function did those dollars come out of? I mean, I guess they either had to come out of instructional leadership or out of instruction, which means they came out of the campus level, right?
No, we don't transfer dollars from the campus to departments.
So there were central allocations to instruction and to school leadership that were reduced in order to increase central admin appropriations?
No, it came out of 53, which means that there were function 53 increases as well.
So where did those increases come from? Because the
Those
only
could-
ones
those
that
could
went
have come-
down were instruction and leadership.
They could come from other functions as well. It's all just movement in between all those different functions.
Still doesn't make sense to me because all the other ones went up. So in order for something to go up, something else had to come down.
I get, and that's why this nets to zero, right? Because everything.
Yeah, and the only two that, well, with the exception of the one that went down by $10,000, the two big buckets that went down were instruction and instructional leadership.
Right. There are so many transfers out there, I can't tell you exactly which ones caused the 53 to go. I can go find them.
I guess what I'm
But-
fundamentally trying to understand is why was a decision made to reduce from instructional leadership and add to these other buckets?
Again-
Where is it the district level?
So in the finance department, we don't make those decisions. Those are all at the campus or the department level that do those transfers, and they do those in the system. We don't have folks send in requests to move money from one function to another function or one account to another account.
And this
If they have that
fancy
authority with it,
new
if they're-
system that we've spent all this money on that ties all of our expenditures to our student outcome goals can't tell us those stories?
Well, we can put things in place. It'll slow everybody down. But yes, we could put in there, you have to put a reason in. We could put in workflow where it has to
So then,
go. We don't,
maybe
but
I
we
need
don't
to
do that.
fundamentally ask a question when we get these budget amendments. Like, it feels like we're just check. That there's no understanding of why things have moved between function, just like we get when we're approving a budget to begin with.
And Trustee Dygard, one thing I would like to add to this, as a new superintendent, and Chief Glenn knows this as well. I've asked for a complete audit from the Council of Great City Schools, so we're looking forward to them coming in and taking a close look at all of our practices from the school base all the way to the district level to make recommendations around what this can look like. That's a common practice, when you have a new superintendent. So we're looking forward to see what those look like, to be able to share that information with the board and move forward with any recommendations that make sense for HISD that this board may agree with.
Okay,
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I mean, what this looks like to me is we're taking money away from educating kids and spending it on other buckets. And I feel a responsibility to understand why. Thank you.
Trustee Guidry?
So, and let me just ask, would decentralization do away with that and give us more control as to who's paying or getting rid of decentralization, I'm sorry. Centralization, yeah. Would that help with us having more control on how the money is being spent?
And Trustee Guidry, that's to go back to what Trustee Dygard indicated. That's one of the reasons why we want to take a look. There could be pros, there could be cons, but I want a holistic view of everything to be able to come back, make those necessary recommendations. But to answer your question, could moving to a more centralized, there's complete centralization, there's partial centralization, but we want to get the recommendation around what we're not doing good, what we need to do better. And my attitude has always been, if there is an opportunity to get better, get better. But we have to have, the voice, the feedback, and that's what we're looking forward to getting from the council and the group that's being put together now.
Perfect, because if the principals are able to move that money around and we have no way of controlling how that is being moved, then I think we need to take a look at it. My other question goes to item number 52. We just voted down the approval for the purchase order 210410, but for $950, which would have improved our police department and being able to, and having better systems that would assist our department, which we need the police department on these campuses. And if for some reason my colleagues don't feel like we do, let me just say we need, I know in Southwest Houston, we would like to keep our police department. And so if we would have them on the campus, I would really like them to be equipped with the most current and up-to-date equipment that is available to them. So let me ask you, the fact that we just voted down this proposal for the purchase order, does that money come from 52? Do we get that back to be able to do something else with it?
Well, it's still in the budget in 52.
So it remains in their budget in 52. Can we remove it from that budget and utilize it someplace else?
You could.
Okay.
If an amendment at the district level was made, but I think what we do understand is that whether it's all four buckets or 3 buckets of tasers, the software, we know that a couple of those are going to come back. We don't know if there's more understanding that needs to happen and more discussion that needs to happen around the tasers to bring it back. But anything can happen in terms of an amendment to move from one project to the next.
Okay.
And the police department still needs a software system, and the police department still needs body cameras, right? So you wouldn't want to move that out because at some point cameras will fail and we will get to a point where there are no body cameras. They'll have a system, we'll have to buy additional servers, right? Because once they get to a certain point, they can't keep everything, right? So there'll be that cost as well.
And
so
it is important to know and understand that I used, when I was in Charlotte as COO, I supervised our police department. And everything from a technological standpoint, much like Mr. Gilhousen or Chief Gilhousen would explain in terms of technology, they have a lifespan. Technology gets better every 3-5 years, sometimes every year, and it's important for us to be able to keep up. Chief Lopez talked about how much work goes into trying to, by hand, put together data. One question from a board member sometimes can cause, hours of work to try to figure it out, when this software could help us answer those questions very easily. So I look forward to some of this coming back, if not all, at some point.
Thank you.
Trustee Blueford Daniels.
Thank you, Dr. Allen and Mr. House. And I was listening, my sister was making a comment to me, even though I'm not texting going out, she was making a comment. My sister buried her son at 24. And the first thing he was in the military, fighting for all of us. And his name was Carrie Brown. And first thing she said when she received the news that her son was killed after serving in an elite force of the Army, why didn't you tase him? Why didn't you tase him? So I'm just gonna leave that comment out there right there and I'm through with it. Thank you.
Trustee Dygard, did you need a round two?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
So Trustee Goodry, I appreciate your comments and your question about centralization, decentralization, and Superintendent House, that you're going to take a deeper dive with an outside perspective. But I think the thing here is not just us not knowing why things are moved between functions at the campus level, but even if you re-centralize it all, the question that I had is, why did central office at the district level move things between functions and out of instruction into other areas? And they don't know. So the question would still stand even if the district was centralized. So anyway, that's gonna be a question I'm gonna have every month. Especially when such a big chunk got moved out of instruction. Thank you.
Just to respond briefly, my understanding was Chief said it was the principals moving that money around and not necessarily administration. Am I understanding that correctly?
The majority of this is administration, and campuses can also use function 53 and 52, right? So they can move money into those accounts as well.
I wanted to make one comment as a principal. When you put your money in function 11, if you had a situation where you had a classroom that was going to need a waiver, and that classroom had 24 kids in it, or 26 kids in it, and you needed to buy an aid, then you would take that money from where you put the bulk of your money, because anytime that you have a certain amount of money, you put it in different buckets of the way that you want to spend it. Even if you knew that if you were at the line of 450 and you knew you were going to have enough kids to buy an assistant principal, you take that money and move it down over here in this leadership position to buy. If you needed to buy an aid, you would take that $19,000. If you just took it from $63.99, function 11, and take a little bit from, if it's a bilingual aid, you can take it from 33. And if you have, it depends on what it is that you're moving. So you may not have known at the beginning of the school year that you were going to need an aid in the classroom. So you take all of your money and you put it in a spot. Instead of putting a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here, you put that chunk there because you know you're going to need it. And so when it comes time for you to need that money and to use that money, you just take it there and put it over there. Any other comments?
Yes,
Please
yes.
vote.
I still have one more. Sorry, I was in the queue for round two.
We're already in round two. Go ahead, Trustee Cruz.
Okay, thank you. I would just ask for future amendments, and I think this has come up in the past, the concern of the lack of understanding. I mean, I don't think any of us on this board are finance experts. If we could have much more detail, obviously not in the weeds, but just a breakdown of what happens behind the scenes so we can have a better understanding. I know that we've requested a workshop or even just a presentation during a regular board meeting, I think would be really helpful. And then just a minor detail, if we could just have lines on this printout. I mean, I print it out and I'm like highlighting, it's hard for me to follow. So that's my request. Thank you.
So remember, on budget transfers between functions, one transfer per school is going to be could have 260 different reasons, right? And they do many transfers a month, right? So, and that's why I tried to summarize.
I'm not asking for that level of detail, but I think if you're unable to answer, we're asking the percentage of what campus is spent versus central office, and just an understanding. So I feel like we're kind of like, you're giving us the same answers and we're still understanding it the same way. I think it needs to be presented differently.
Trustee Cruz, what I will say, if there's specific questions, if we could get those questions in writing, I want to make sure that each trustee gets their questions answered. If we need to come back, and we've done it a few times this week, and connect via Zoom with trustees individually, we will do that as well to make sure that those questions are answered. That's definitely something that we want to do from a transparency standpoint.
And I appreciate that, but I think it would be, you mentioned transparency. I mean, I think the public needs to hear. I think it's difficult when we're all having these one-off conversations with you or anyone on staff. We're not getting the same information. So, not to make more meetings or make meetings longer, but I think we need to, we're being asked to approve spending. And, that's one of our key responsibilities as board members, and we need to understand it. I don't take any of these decisions lightly, and I do appreciate the time that you and your staff take to answer questions, but I think it's helpful if we're all getting the same information. Thank you.
Trustee Santos?
Thank you, President Allen. And I am going to piggyback off my colleague, Trustee Cruz. Yes, absolutely. The public needs to know where their money is going. And so in that respect, I guess this question is to Lisa. We've asked multiple times for historical expenditures on the I items. Do we need to vote that into policy if we have to keep asking the administration for that to happen? Number one, that's my first question. And my second question, I was under the understanding, if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I'd like to move forward with this. I thought we'd pulled all of I-1A. I needed to pull a second job number. So
Let me answer your second.
pull it off consent, so.
Let me answer your second question first. The way it is posted, the only part of I-1 that was pulled was the specific project that you've been talking about. So that's the only item that was pulled from consent. The rest of I-1 is on the consent agenda. So if you'd like to pull it off now, you'd have to a motion in a second and a vote of your colleagues. With respect to your first question, I think this might be the first board meeting at which Mr. House has been at where you've made that request. So you might want to have a conversation.
I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize. Mr. House, I was telling him that I've been in this relationship with HISD since 1986, and the last 4 years, almost 4 years now, it's been without Mr. House, and I'm very, very grateful that he's been accommodating thus far. So, Mr. House, that was my ex-boyfriend that I was talking to. So, so now moving forward, I'd really like the historical expenditures to be on the I items the way they were before. And I would like to, once we finish voting here, I'd like to move to bring that other item back. So, thank you.
We'll make sure to do so.
Please vote. Seven for and one against. Our next item up for discussion is agenda item I-7, approval of the ESSER 3 grant funds.
Dr. Allen,
Yes.
This one's going to be a lengthy conversation. Could we go back to the other I item that I wanted to pull from consent?
You already know what it is?
Yep.
Trustee Santos, would you like to make a motion?
I move that we pull item I-1A on packet page 143, job number 190718, awards, trophies, and promotional items, please.
I-1A. Packet page number?
143. And I think it was 19 of 31. in the agenda item.
143. The one that is a vendor name change?
Awards, trophies, promotional items, job number 190718.
143. The one where that it needs a term correction? I-143. I-1A. The one on student assessment platform.
It's page 19 of 31 of
143.
agenda item I-1A, packet page 143.
Pick a page 143.
That's where. Yeah, it's different.
It's what of 31?
19, page 19 of 31 of the agenda item
19.
I-1A, and it's packet page 143.
Okay, the one where they're asking for an increase. Do I have a second?
She seconded, now we're up to the vote. To pull it, yes, we're voting to pull the item.
I have a
Consent.
motion and a second. Please vote. Seven for, one against. Trustee Santos?
Okay, so on November 8th, 2018, we voted, I think it was like from 600,000 and, we increased it by 3 million over 5 years. Now it's 10 million over 5 years. So I just would like my colleagues to know the historical expenditure on it and why it wasn't included on this agenda item.
So the historical is, and I'm glad that you brought that up because I just would like to address why we do not put historical expenditures on the board item. So we have a public information office where folks ask for open records requests. And this is sometimes when people ask for an open records request regarding spend as it's related to vendors, that is sometimes sent to the AG and that information is withheld. So that's why we don't put that on the board item itself, but we give you that historical expenditure on the board summary. So the number for this item is on the board summary, on your board summary, under historical annual expenditure, here. May I bring this to you, Trustee Santos?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh yeah, this is not gonna work for me. If we could just put it back on, that would be great. And if we get we get PIRs all the time. So my second question is, are we doing anything to address the fact that we are on course to spend $7 million more on trophies than originally planned?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are we doing anything to address the fact that we are on course to spend $7 million more on trophies than originally planned?
So I believe as Dr. Cruz mentioned in agenda review, this spend primarily comes from campuses and departments in the athletic department, et cetera. So should a budget increase not be allotted for this project, we will run out of spend. We'll have no more spend on this project. And we either, one, would have to rebid the project and do a whole new solicitation, or two, we just tell schools and departments that we don't have the funds for them to order trophies and awards, et cetera.
So you're telling me schools are spending more money on trophies? Is that what you're saying?
This is for trophies, awards, and promotional items. And so I would tell you that 90% of the spend related to this contract comes from a campus as opposed to from departments. So should the board not approve the budget increase for this contract will not have any more funding left, and the campuses won't have a vendor to order trophies.
Okay, so I think what I'm getting at, I don't want to say what I'm getting at. My question would be, how much of this is coming from central office? The spend? None of the spend is coming from?
Less than 10% of the spend comes from departments. This is the bulk of this spend. 90% of the spend comes from campuses.
Okay. And could you tell me, like, how over a course of 5 years, I mean, from 2018 to now, we've just continued to double the campuses. Are they doing something different? I mean, are enrollments down? What are campuses doing that they're asking for more?
So I think a lot of the spend occurred during the pandemic, right? Just to motivate students, et cetera, and recognize them for their achievements during the pandemic. So the bulk of the spend that's occurred over the short term of this contract occurred towards the end of 2019 throughout 2020.
Okay.
So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zapata.
If there are any other comments and questions, please make sure you put your name in the queue. Seeing no others, please vote. Who is this? This is Holly. Okay. Trustee Cruz? Abstain? We have 7-4 and 1 abstention. The next item on the agenda is, this is the last item held for discussion, is agenda item K1, approval of proposed revisions to board policy, educational philosophy regarding constraints, second reading.
Point of order, I'm sorry, yes. I-7.
I missed
Skipped
one?
over I-7, thank you.
I thought I did I-7. No? We didn't do the vote. We didn't do it at all. My apologies. Our next item here for discussion is agenda item I-7, approval of 21-22, 22-23, 23-24 budgets for CRRSA, ESSER 2, and ARP Act ESSER 3 grant funds. This item is being held at the request of trustees Cruz, Hernandez, and Dygard. Trustee Cruz?
Thank you. Superintendent House, I had submitted some additional questions, and I think the most pressing question I have, I don't know if you got an answer, is can we separate out and approve the spending for the first year of the ESSER money?
Can you repeat your question? Can we separate out?
Can we approve, if we make a motion, can we approve just to, can we make a motion to approve just the spending of the first year? And once you answer my question, I'll kind of give you the reason where I'm going with this.
Okay. Glenn, will you please provide some insight in reference to the question, please?
Sure. So the item itself is actually accepting the ESSER dollars. So you don't want to go and try to just accept only year one of the ESSER dollars, right? So this item is actually not voting on the actual use of or the specific budget of ESSER. It is acceptance of the ESSER funds. Right. The superintendent has the authority to create the budgets and submit the budgets for the district, but the board has to accept the funds. Correct. Yep. I'm sorry.
Trustee Cruz, did you have additional questions?
Come back to me. I'm trying to reread agenda item. Thank you.
Okay, trustee Hernandez?
I don't have any more questions on this item. Thank you.
Trustee Dygard?
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm confused. Because I thought this was approving how we were going to spend the money, because it says on packet page 197, the purpose of this agenda item is to request approval of the recommended budgets for 2021 to 2023 CRR SA ESSER 2 and 21 to 24 ARP Act ESSER 3 program funding. So what it sounds like, though, when you just answered Trustee Cruz's question, is we are approving receiving the money from the federal government.
Correct. These are the budgets that we're going to load for. We've got to accept the dollars to be able to load those budgets.
Okay, so we're approving you getting the big giant check. I know it's not really a big giant check, right? And depositing that big giant check in our bank account.
Right.
And when you deposit that big giant check, are you putting that big giant check in the different functions, or you're just putting it in our bank account?
No, it'll go in. It would go into all these different budgets.
So it's going into the different functions. Function 11, 23, 56, correct. Whatever. Okay. So then how does this differ? Because every year we approve a budget, right? So are we pre-approving essentially these dollars and how you plan to spend them 2 years from now?
So you're accepting the dollars and you're accepting what is being presented as the budget here. But Mr. House has the ability then, going forward, to make amendments to this and submit those amendments to TEA. We don't bring amendments every time there's a change to the budget for a grant. Those don't come back.
Okay.
It's just that initial approval, just like back in, if you look back at the June budget adoption.
Mm-hmm.
We brought to you all of our federal entitlements, the Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, all that, right? But we bring those to you in the buckets of how we spend them, because for federal grants, we don't submit to them by function, because that's not a federal, that's not the federal way of doing it. We do it by, here are the things that we are doing, and these are the buckets we're putting them in. So that's why you see it presented to you in this way.
Okay, so if this doesn't pass, we don't get to receive the big giant check.
No.
Because it only comes in one big giant check.
Well, actually, technically the way it works is when we have to spend the money first. One reason we have to have some fund balance, because we have to actually do the expenditures first, and then we submit the expenditures to TEA, and then we draw the money down.
So you don't
So it's
actually
not all
have the
one
money
time.
until you spend it.
That is correct. We spend it first, and then we get reimbursed.
Okay. Might have more questions about this in a little bit. My next question is, some districts are using these dollars to supplant into their regular budget on things that they're legally allowed to spend these grant dollars on, so that then they can save the dollars they would have spent this year to stretch out any initiatives they put in place for these 3 years. They can stretch those initiatives out financially for even 5 years. Are we doing anything like that?
So we are doing, we know we've talked about pulling back some funds actually this week to potentially be able to do some of that. We're not that far along to be able to say this is exactly what we're going to do, but yes, we've had those discussions about making sure that by the time we get to 23, 24, that things that are working, that we would like to try to continue, at least be able to try to continue those things at least for a couple years. At least maybe get us to the 2027 legislative session, right, to be able to talk about some of those things that we need to be able to continue, but we need funding to do it.
Okay. And then, my next thing, this is a ton of money. Money's falling from the sky. This is supposed to be game changer money for kids. And so what specific data will be looked at? I'll wait for round 2. Thank you.
Trustee Cruz, are you ready for the rest of your question?
Yes, thank you, President Allen. Okay, so I'm reading the agenda item. It says, the purpose of this agenda item is to request approval of the recommended budgets for 21, 20, 2020, whatever, all the CARES Act funding. So it's asking, it says request approval. So maybe Lisa can clarify. I want to be sure I understand what exactly I'm voting on, because I thought we were voting to approve the spending.
So we can't do any of the spending without you accepting the funds. So, I mean, they're really hand in hand.
Okay, so then I guess my first question stands then. Can we approve just the, is it like, does it have to be all come in one bucket? Can we just say, we want to approve the first year of
We need to be able to show that the board has accepted all of the ESSER funds. We don't want to piecemeal accept funds. I'm not even sure how that would work.
We don't have a concrete answer on that. Do we know for a fact from TA that we cannot separate it?
I'm not sure that it's ever been done. I would have to actually ask that question. But generally, when you receive a NOGA, you receive a NOGA for the full amount. So you've got to accept the full amount or none of it.
Okay, would appreciate the information. And then a couple of other questions I submitted that I didn't get answers to. I really need to understand the why. So what data did you use to make these decisions? How do you know these investments will bring better outcomes for our students?
Deputy Superintendent Cruz will answer your question.
Yes, great questions, Trustee Cruz. And if I may address the first question, maybe provide some additional context. The funding that you all would approve, as Chief Reed indicated, is the full 3-year funding. But the actual allocation of funds is done on a yearly basis. And as Chief Reed indicated, it is subject to change per the superintendent's will in terms of submitting amendments. So you approving it tonight doesn't mean that we're committed to doing all of those things for the next 3 years at all. It just allows him the flexibility to start the work now and to make amendments. And I know that Superintendent House earlier today indicated some specific elements. There are over 100 different programs that were submitted as part of the initial grant. Now, of course, Superintendent House was not here at the time, so he did not have a chance to really be part of that creation. But since he joined us, he's been looking at it, examining, looking at the data, and identifying things that, yes, these are immediate needs for our students, and these are things that are based in data, grounded in what's best for students, best practices aligned to the board goals, et cetera, and that we want to move forward with right now. But it would actually, a majority, or not a majority, but close to half of the funding actually would not be assigned to, well, it would be assigned to a specific project, but Superintendent House would actually come back with recommendations around how those additional funds would be purposed. So what I'm trying to get at is there's flexibility, a significant amount of flexibility to adapt, to align it with the strategic plan that's being developed, to be more thoughtful about how we're allocating those resources. But if we don't get the approval tonight, then what happens is we can't start with any of it, which means things like stipends for teachers, for example, that we have already committed to our public, we wouldn't be able to move forward with those right now because we wouldn't be receiving any of the ESSER approval. But to your question, your second question around how decisions have been made, I mean, when you look at the areas that Superintendent House shared with you all this evening, when you break it down, all of the different programs, I mean, every one of those has substantial data behind the why, and then the practices that are being suggested are also, again, practices that either have been successful and that we're going to be able to expand. So again, going back to the initial example, like a college advising, we know it works, we have data that it works, we know there's a need because we've been tracking that data, so now there's additional resources to support that. It's also the intervention piece around tutorials. That's a big bucket. And I know one thing that Superintendent House has talked about is making sure that we're not imposing things on campuses, but that we're working with them so there's flexibility for that fund to be utilized in a way that's going to really support students and at the local campus level. So the pieces that have been recommended to you all tonight that Superintendent House has said we want to keep, those are pieces that we feel very confident are going to move the needle for students based on the data, based on research, based on best practices. But there still is a lot that I think Superintendent House wants to do, especially as we get more information from the needs assessment, as we get a more defined strategic plan.
Okay. I think it would just be really helpful to share more of those data points. I mean, I hear you saying it. I need to visually see it. And I'm not saying like hundreds of pages, but I mean, I think very high level data would help at least me. And I would think my colleagues as well understand the why behind where some of these decisions were made so that we can have complete trust in the process. And then I saw on the list, it said, we're spending $250 million on other district costs. I wasn't sure what that meant.
So those were actually, if you look at the document that Superintendent House shared with you all, that is not reflected there anymore in terms of the commitments.
Got it. Okay. And then how are campuses going to be able to draw on these funds?
Deputy Superintendent.
Sure. So what if you reference the document that was shared with you from the superintendent, an overwhelming majority of those funds, campuses exercise almost full discretion as to how to utilize them within those particular functions. So for example, if you look at interventions, right, the tutorial funds, we talked earlier this evening about having actually an allocation based on algorithms and kind of looking at all of the different factors that Dr. Matney is working on. We would then identify the amount of funds per campus and then work with the campuses collaboratively to figure out whether they're going to do that in-house or contract it out with an approved vendor, how they can actually best utilize those funds for that purpose. So a lot of the things that were being done at the central office level kind of determined, those are the things that actually have been put a pause on until we really get a chance to dive into the data, figure out what our kids need, and kind of align the resources. But most of the things right now, if we think about campuses, the counselors that we're going to be providing, the wraparound expansion, the wraparound services, those are things that we know our students need, and they need them now, they need them yesterday, right, that we want to immediately move forward with. The other items, again, that are a little, that I think we still have work to do in terms of really refining and revisiting, those are the things that Superintendent House is indicating we're going to put a pause on until we get some more strategy defined for the district.
And I want to remind or share with all trustees that these adjustments were made because of some of the feedback in the individual sessions that I had with you all. Originally, we were going to bring this to you for approval as is and make the amendments, adjustments along the way. But what we did is went through line by line to ensure that we provided the kind of supports that made sense. Now, we pulled out nearly $400 million of this that you'll see in the most recent report that we sent you. So this is a significantly less ask at the table right now, simply because of the feedback that we've received. So we definitely tried to make the adjustments in reference to what we heard around some of the concerns that some of you had.
And Superintendent House, if I may, maybe just kind of go through each category just at a high level and kind of, I think, to just share with the public and with you all, right? So as part of what Superintendent House has shared in terms of what he's proposing that we move forward with immediately, right, about, as he mentioned, there's $734 million. So it would actually, $426 million would not be assigned to a particular program at this point. Of those 734, around 50 million would go to special education. And again, we've gone in the past and kind of walked you all through what those different components are. But again, when we talk about things that are very important, very time sensitive that we need to get on right now, that's providing supports to our special education students. $28 million going towards college career readiness. And that includes actually some of the things that we're talking about earlier today, providing our seniors with SAT, ACT preparation, our middle school students with SAT, ACT preparation, supporting AP academies, professional development for teachers to catch up the students on advanced placement, international baccalaureate, the college career advisors, again, very time-sensitive things that are grounded in a true need that we've quantified so that we can deploy those college advisors to work with students. We talk about technology, the importance of making sure that we're providing our middle school students and our younger students also with devices, which is going to be very important, especially as we talk about, I know as part of the safety plan, thinking about students who are in quarantine, for example, or maybe in quarantine that have to have virtual instruction, Wi-Fi spots, et cetera. Supports, about close to $11 million in supports for our ELL students. Targeted resources. We know that that's a group that's seen significant declines, right, in terms of academic achievement. Resources for our refugee and immigrant students, right, providing a lot of services and support. So again, really, and you will have the document, but kind of looking through it, these are the things that the superintendent has identified as like, these are kind of no-brainers, like things that we absolutely need for our students and that we're proposing that we begin with. Tutorial services, again, $37 million that would go to campuses. So campuses can contract tutors, can bring those interventions, again, address House Bill 4545, which we need to immediately address, right? We need to get interventionists and students in front of our kids. Some instructional materials, library, outfitting all of our libraries with books. We know that many of them are depleted right now, so they have culturally relevant textbooks. I mean, the list, I think, and then the ADA hold harmless, which Glenn can speak to, but making sure that, again, we're holding our schools harmless as it pertains to the ADA loss. And then also some of the new components that the superintendent is addressing in terms of safety, additional components, which I know he's going to be sharing with you all. So these items are items that the superintendent administration feels very strongly about. I mean, that we can support, we can provide data for. I think just going through this list, I would imagine you will also realize that these are very important things that our kids immediately need. But it would give us flexibility to come back to you all when the superintendent kind of has that strategic plan and say, you know what, this is what's missing. Or even among these things, if adjustments have to be made along the way, if we're realizing they're not working, they can be changed. But if we don't, we're gonna lose an opportunity to start addressing the needs of our students, which again are significant and very time sensitive.
And how are you going to know what's actually working, and at what junctures are you going to be looking at that?
Sure. So part of the funds will actually be built out, will be earmarked also to support research and evaluation. So all of these things will have a component or an evaluation component attached to them, whether that's through Dr. Matney's office or through some of our partners, organizations like HERC. So we'll be looking at, because for us, it's not just important to provide all of these things to our students, but we need to understand what's working and what doesn't, even beyond the scope of this grant. We want to know. This is an opportunity for us to do things we've not been able to do in the past and to assess what is that impact. And we've been working with Dr. Matney looking at like what would be for each one of these major programs, what would be the key performance indicators. You know, attaching interventions to outcomes is always tricky for any district in America because they're always confounding, right? You don't just do one thing in isolation. We can't do a randomized controlled trial study, as was mentioned earlier with most academic interventions, but we can find correlations, right? We can find things and capture qualitative data and quantitative data to realize like what is actually really moving the needle for students, right? So that as we're working throughout this process, we're reallocating resources in a strategic way beyond the shelf life of the grant. When we're thinking about just how do we use our own district limited resources, if we know that X, Y, and Z interventions work really well, then those are things we're going to invest in. And if we realize that they don't, then those are things we move away from. So everything related to ESSER will have a very strong evaluation component where we will be tracking exactly how it influences students both academically and non-academically. And I mean, each one of these is going to look a little different, right? We could go through all of the different components and say, what is that evaluation going to look like? It just depends on what is the scope, what is the purpose, what is it intended to do, right? But I think the underlying idea is everything needs to have an evaluation component.
Okay, I look forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Trustee Sung?
Thank you. So item I7, that's in our binders, are you telling me that this attachment is different than what was in my binder a week ago?
So Superintendent House, if you look, he shared with you all basically a subset of that. What he did is he went through all of that and he said, these are the things that I've looked at, that he looked at the supporting data, and he said, we need to move forward with this right now.
I read his email.
So
I'm just asking if the thing I'm voting on is the same or different.
You're voting on all of it, but the commitment from the superintendent, as he indicated, is that we'd only be actually taking action on the items that he outlined.
You answered my question. Thank you. I got it. Just for transparency, Mr. House, could you just summarize? I don't need you to read the whole email, but if you would just touch on the highlights of your email to the board about how you have reflected on the feedback you've received and how you want to move forward with this grant.
Sure, Trustee Sung. First of all, what we did, there were questions around the original approach. So I had conversations individually with those individuals that had questions around the original approach. The original approach was for us to bring the budget as it was, as you saw it, as it was brought to you essentially in the last few months. But I saw that discomfort, so what we decided to do was to sit down individually, bucket by bucket, take a look at what needed to be pulled out because there wasn't the complete confidence there that it was necessary to move forward with. And once we did that line by line, it allowed for us to pull out over $400 million. So I felt like that approach was the best approach versus asking you to vote and then coming back to amend. So we've tried to pivot and make the adjustments that we've heard from board members or trustees. So we hope that feedback that you've provided is reflected in what we've done here.
Thank you very much, and I really
Sure.
appreciated that.
My pleasure.
Now, in your email, and by the way, you use the language of evidence-based, and so thank you for combing and bringing forward and keeping the things that are evidence-based, and then looking at how we can spend the remaining dollars later. So the new items you mentioned in your email are a stipend for vaccinated employees and the per pupil safety fund, which was discussed last week as well. So if that's not in the item we're voting on, how do we implement that?
Trustee Cruz, can you share a little bit of information here?
Sure.
I'm sorry. 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. Glenn can speak to that, but yeah, Glenn, go ahead.
Yep. So what you have in front of you right now is what what went into the application back in July, because remember it was due on July 7th. So that's what TEA has, and that is what TEA has approved right now. So that's what we've received the NOGA on. So to be able to accept the ESSER dollars in their totality, because we can't accept just portions of ESSER, we need to approve this item tonight. Then the items that Mr. House has mentioned in there that are different from the plan, then we will have to do an amendment with TEA, which, we don't know how long that'll take. So we couldn't just go out tomorrow, for example, and start doing this vaccines stipends. However, what the approval allows him to do is that the dollars that are not in that $400 million, we can go ahead and start spending and being ready for kids next week. Right.
Great.
We will do those amendments throughout the next 3 years.
Okay, I got it. So just a couple of comments. Okay, so Trustee Cruz, I am with you on wanting these dollars. This is a once-in-a-generational opportunity for us to move the needle for kids, for us to match Massachusetts, right, and how much we're able to spend per pupil on kids. And I want it to be evidence-based, rooted in a strategic plan where every dollar is used to maximum effect for kids. I 100% agree. I asked in 2017, who knows, who heard me do this? Who's around, who's back? I asked in 2017 for our strategic plan. I asked in 2018 for our strategic plan. I asked in 2019, 2020. And in 2021, we are going to get an evaluation from the Council of Great City Schools, and we're going to move forward with a strategic plan. And I just don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, right? There's things that are evidence-based that need to move forward here. We're going to have to do it a little backwards, right? The street, we're building the plane. I hate building planes as we fly them, but that's where we are, right? We're going to be building our strategic plan, and my hope is that we can jigsaw this ESSER work into a strategic plan. And so, Mr. House, I'm with Trustee Cruz and really wanting these two processes, the strategic planning and the ESSER plan, to fit together. So when we look back a year ago, right, a year from now, we can see how it all fits. Thank you.
Trustee Guidry?
And so the only question I had, Glenn, is you said something earlier. You said we're approving, just accepting these funds in the buckets they're in right now, as it is placed right now, and Superintendent House can make adjustments thereafter, but those adjustments have to come before the board, or he could just make those adjustments on his own?
Though the amendments do not have to come back to the board.
Okay. Thank you.
Trustee Bluefer Daniels?
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Madam President, Mr. House, Glenn. I know it's late, but I know I've heard, if I could direct this question to Deputy Cruz. I've heard Cruz and Mr. House mention at least 6 times that we were going to be adjusting to the needs of the children to produce outcomes, correct? Maybe not that facet, but bottom line, right? And you said earlier when we were questioning the needs assessments and the need to move fundings in various places. And so this is an opportunity I've heard continuously. We need to sign off on this money. We've got a plan and we can adjust accordingly. So to go back and recap everything, you said that this is going to be measured based on beginning of year data. We talked about that, right? And if you saw that it's not moving in the right direction, we'd adjust accordingly. I'm summing it up, but that's what I understood it to be, correct? So let me put it in this perspective. As a single parent, I continuously monitored my finances. And when I received my income tax check every year, then I took that money and moved it and paid off various things that I hadn't planned for initially with my finances. That makes sense, budget man, right? So this in essence is what you're doing. This ESSER fund is coming in and we can use this money to be able to distribute it in places that we didn't have necessarily the support before. I see one thing down here we talked about continuously. Wraparound specialists, expansion of services. That's a lot of money. So we've got the money, our income tax check is coming in, and so we're going to use it to be able to hire people and support wraparound services at some of these schools. Am I correct in that summary? Thank you.
Trustee Santos?
Thank you, President Allen. So if kids are not safe, they cannot learn. If kids don't have instructors and support staff in a safe environment, they cannot learn. If students do not have the resources, they cannot learn. So, Dr. Cruz, I'm giving you homework. You're gonna write down my questions as I speak, okay? Masks are needed. That is just the first step in keeping our kids safe. We've had the experts email us saying that we need physical distancing and airflow to continue to keep our kids safe. So how does this I-7 address that? Teachers and students need to feel 100% welcome to stay home if they have symptoms. How does this I-7 address that?
And Trustee Santos, what I will say, the items that you're talking about right now are going to be addressed in the Ready, Set, Go plan.
Okay,
We're releasing it on Friday. I was going to give you a snapshot of it in my report towards the end of the meeting here, but just
right,
FYI.
and so I'm being asked to approve this tonight. I mean, right now. So I kind of need maybe even just a snapshot of what's going on with the questions I'm about to ask. But I want you to hear what my concerns are and what my community's concerns are, and what teachers and students and parents have reached out talking to me saying, "Can you advocate this for Trustee Santos?" So that's what I'm doing tonight. Parents have asked for virtual instruction. Parents have asked, that we saved money. Where's that money that we saved? Our employees have asked for a comprehensive sick leave bank so we can protect. I'm just going to finish my bullet points here. So there should be a comprehensive sick leave to protect the community, to make an easy decision to stay home when you might have COVID-19. We need to compensate employees for hardships of suffering from COVID during the pandemic. I'm going to advocate for our support staff. They need a stronger sick leave because they are more likely not to be able to afford missing days. Our support staff, it's not lower level employees, therefore lower level benefits. It's what will it take to make this class of employees stay home when they need them to. We can't just say, okay, you can't afford to go to the doctor, so I'm going to go to work anyway and I'm sick. So that sick leave, that bank is so important for our students because without our support staff and without our teachers, our kids aren't going to come in and learn. It's not going to be a safe environment. And I'll just wait for round 2 for the rest.
Trustee Hernandez?
Thank you. Myrna, Trustee Guidry asked if the amendment to this item be brought to the board, and the answer was no, correct?
Sorry, I couldn't understand the question. You broke up.
The amendments to this item will not be brought to the board, is that correct?
No, the amendments don't come back to the board.
Is there any way that we can change that, modify that, so that amendments are brought back to the board?
I'm going to have to ask that question of Lisa. I know in our board policy, it says the superintendent is able to make those amendments. How would we, is it just a request?
Well, I'm a little confused. I mean, there's the plan you submitted to TEA. There is accepting the funds from TEA, but then you've also got to accept the funds into the budget, right, Glenn? That is a function of the board, getting it into the budget, getting it into the correct function level. So if you're changing how you're appropriating or spending money for this particular budget year using this money, that is something that would come back to the board. Wouldn't you agree?
No, grants are not approved at the function level. Only the general fund, debt service, and nutrition services funds are approved. Amendments, original budget amendments are approved on only those three funds at the function level. Grants are accepted for the purpose of the grant.
But you're expending it on things that are in the budget, correct?
Correct. But once you've accepted that grant, then the superintendent has authority to make amendments to the use of those funds as long as they are allowable within the grant.
I think there's a difference of opinion between the administration and information that I'm getting from David Thompson, your other board counsel. So we'd have to resolve that.
Okay.
So can we
the
go
reason
to
I'm asking,
close to resolve it, Lisa, or could we resolve it here?
Why don't we go on with your other questions, and I'll see if he's available.
that was my question, because I feel like we want to make sure that this money is going to the most effective ways that we can use it for students. We know that there's going to be amendments. I think that what I'm hearing from my colleagues is that we want to make sure that we are able to somehow oversee that, because that is what we essentially do as board members.
Is that a question?
Table this item to come.
Was that a question, Trustee Hernandez, or a statement?
I guess it's a question. Can we table this item and move on to the next item that was called, and then go to closed session if anyone, David is.
Do you want to make a motion?
I make a motion to table this item.
I believe Trustee Hernandez wants to table to later in the meeting as opposed to postponing it, which would either be indefinitely or postponing it to a specific time, which would be a different meeting. Am I correct? You want to table it to later in the meeting and take up another item?
Correct. Unless David's available right now.
Second. Please vote.
I want to completely clarify my understanding, that we will be coming back then, if this passes, we're coming back to this tonight, correct?
The motion, Trustee Hernandez, is just to table it to allow you to take up another item on the agenda. Is that correct?
Okay, I just want to, we sometimes use these words interchangeably. I just want to clarify. Thank you.
6 for, 1 against. Our last item held for discussion in agenda item K1, approval of proposed revisions to board policy educational philosophy regarding constraints, second reading. This item is being held at the request of trustee Cruz and Hernandez. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second? Trustee Cruz?
You can come back to me, I'm still pulling it up.
Uh-oh. What happened? Can you ask that again? You were breaking up.
I can start. I can start.
I said, come back to me. Thank you.
Trustee Hernandez?
Thank you. Mr. House, I know that we talked about the difference between why the administration removed the words on constraint progress measure 1.2 from bilingual to ESL. And so just for my for myself, I would like to see the data behind that, because on the Q&A, sorry, not the Q&A, the explanation at the front, the word special education and bilingual, it states that the word special education and bilingual were removed to clarify that the measures based on the population of students.
I'm sorry, I only heard probably every other word that you were cutting out, so I apologize for not hearing you. I don't know if anybody else heard everything that you said either.
It's very loud on my end. Okay. So on the explanation sheet, it states that bilingual was removed to clarify that the measure is based on the population of students and not teachers. In our conversation, there was a different explanation about why bilingual was replaced for ESL. So what our conversation was that ESL students are struggling more than bilingual students.
Yes, and that was that. Did the information that we actually sent you, was that not clear in what was provided?
Well, it's a different explanation than what's on the explanation sheet.
Okay, we'll give you some more perspective at this time.
Trustee Hernandez, there are two different things that are happening with this one. The first is the removal of the clarifier before the word teachers. And the reason we removed, let's take 1.1 as an example first. The reason we removed the phrase special education before the word teachers is because when we started digging into the data and looking at the metrics, we didn't want to limit what we were looking at to just special education teachers serving students with disabilities. We wanted to expand it because students with disabilities are serviced by general education teachers as well. So that's why we removed the clarifier before the term teachers in both 1.1 and 1.2. The other piece that you're asking about bilingual versus ESL, with the original process we went through was asking our HR partners who are the group of teachers that are most difficult to recruit and fill. And at the beginning of our conversations, that was bilingual, which is why we put forth bilingual students to begin with, because we wanted to target them. But again, once we got into the data, what we determined is even if they're harder to fill, those bilingual students are actually performing at a much higher level. So that was not the need. The need was with students who are in the ESL program. And so, and there are multiple reasons for that. Namely, the ESL program spans all the way up to 12th grade. So that's why we ended up removing bilingual and substituting ESL students for
Okay. I typed in one of my questions just in case the sound is off. The other question I had about this is that we're using the word strong teachers. Do we have a definition for what strong teachers actually is at the district? Because right now, from previous conversations, we know that 90% of our teachers are effective or highly effective.
Yes, ma'am, and those are the two areas that we're using, the effective and highly effective. And we do acknowledge that we have a high percent of our teachers that are in those categories. But when we broke out the data, what it revealed is for students with disabilities and students in the ESL population, the numbers are much lower. And a large reason for that is we can't include teachers that are first-year teachers because they haven't gone through the TAD system yet. So they don't have a track record of being effective or highly effective. So those teachers, their students are in the denominator, so they're included in this, but we can't include them in the numerator because they're served primarily by first-year teachers. And so when we talk about wanting to make sure that our highest need population students are served by our most qualified staff, it's not saying that our brand new teachers aren't doing an amazing job. We just don't have that proof yet for this metric.
Okay. So my question is, how does that work with the percentage of ESL students instead of just qualifying the ESL teachers?
So that goes back to thinking about how they're served. So ESL is primarily designated for the English language arts teacher. So that way, what happens is if you have a high school student who is ESL, and they are serviced by an ESL English language arts teacher, and then a general math, science, social studies, band, dance teacher, then we're not accounting for the need for all those other teachers to be effective or highly effective. Only the teacher that's ESL certified. And when we look at the intent of this metric, it's really about surrounding a student who is ESL and surrounding a student who is receiving special education services with effective teachers at every point in their day.
So how does this constraint progress measure, how is it actually going to change something if it's measuring most of the teachers that the students are going to see?
So one of the conversations that we've had, and this pops up many different ways, is when the departments are really focused on how we can help support teachers in supporting their students. These are really the two student populations that we're focused on already. So when you look at a couple of different prongs, number one, making sure that students with disabilities have those proven track record teachers that are serving students effectively, and then also making sure if we have a large percentage of brand new teachers that are serving our special education population or our ESL population, how can we target professional learning to help move them from a developing teacher into that effective and highly effective categories?
Mr. House, this is a question for you, because we do know that 90% of the teachers are effective or highly effective, and we did see that data earlier today. Do you have any plans on ideas on how we can make sure that our teachers are effective and highly effective?
I think that's a two-prong answer, quite frankly. As I indicated to all trustees, we are moving in a different direction in terms of our evaluation systems. We want to be more precise in reference to being able to provide the kind of feedback to each one of our teachers around exactly where they are. I think we're very broad right now. And then the second prong would be, once we have the kind of evaluation system that allows for us to know exactly where people land on the spectrum of growth and development, then we're able to provide the necessary and appropriate professional development to ensure that the growth is happening with each one of those teachers. So that is to come. That's something that we're focusing on. That's something that we've shared with all trustees, and we're moving forward in that direction as we speak.
Thank you.
I have a question. If these are the board's constraints for the superintendent, developed by the board, and the board didn't change, who changed our constraints? And how are they able to change the board's constraints that belong to the board?
That's a great question. So the constraints themselves, much like the goals themselves, belong to the trustees.
Exactly.
The progress measures belong to administration.
Is
So
that a
the
progress measure?
Yes, so those are progress measures. So the constraint language did not change. It was progress measure 1.1 and 1.2 where the language in the progress measure did.
Thank you. Round two, trustee Sung.
Thank you.
I was in the round one.
Say what?
Are we still on round one?
No, we're moving to round two.
I think this is round one for me, actually.
No, trustee, I have you with a check already on here.
Not on this item?
Not for this
Doesn't matter, I
item.
only have one comment
No.
anyway, so, doesn't matter.
You know what? I'm still on I-7. I
Oh, we're
forgot
on
we
I-7?
tabled it and moved over to K1, so no, this is still round one, my fault.
Okay, so, constraint 4.3, there was a change in the language that seems to be meaningful. So originally, the constraint progress measure was the percentage of students documented as meeting progress for all applicable IEP goals, will increase from from XX to XX. And now it's demonstrating measurable progress for all IEP goals. And then measurable progress is defined in the definitions, thank you for providing those, as meeting progress for 50% or more. So we've kind of changed from a look at all to the 50%. So I imagine that you looked at examples of students and got a sense of like where students are and what would be meaningful for us to set as a target. I know we don't have baseline data, but could you just talk to us what your process was for looking at whatever data you had available to set a goal that was ambitious but achievable?
Absolutely. So you had a really key phrase there, look at data that was available. Much of constraint 4 is brand new process for us. So really there wasn't any data available. So we worked with the Office of Special Education Services. We worked with the Easy IEP vendor on what these are going to look like. And then ultimately, our two conservators also weighed in on these final edits to language. And so really, although I completely hear you on it, it looks like it's a significant difference, it really mirrors the language in the Easy IEP system and just cleans that up so that when we actually have our first reporting, the language will match. So instead of meeting progress for all applicable, we remove the applicable because it really is about all of the IEP. We're not trying to make a subset or anything like that. And then the documented as meeting progress, moving to demonstrated measurable progress, that the subset of measurable progress is in that definition sheet that you're talking about. So it really it hones in on matching the language of the system.
It says 0% in the 1920 school year. Measurable progress, is that because it was truly zero or we don't have data?
It was because this is a brand new system. So it wasn't truly zero, but we have no evidence of what it was because we weren't tracking these items centrally. in a centralized system.
Okay.
So it wasn't that students weren't meeting progress, we just weren't tracking it and documenting it.
Okay, and help me feel confident that, the standard of students meeting 50% of their goals is kind of a good cutoff to be using.
So the conversation around that was, it wasn't 50% of the goals necessarily, it was 50% of, it was getting to 50% progress towards the goal. So if a student was making progress, some progress, they needed to be included in this. They were not going backwards, they could be maintaining.
I mean, your definition's the bottom of page 8, says the number of goals meeting progress. You need 50% of those to be meeting progress. So it really is 50% of the goals.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I was looking at 4.2.
Yeah.
4.3, yes, and so that's, in working with Office of Special Education Services, that's what they look at. If they're meeting 50% of their goals, then that is making progress towards anything less than 50, then they consider that student is not meeting progress at all. So it's their internal definition.
And so, okay, so this is kind of an industry standard, at least for easy IEP then.
Right.
That's used, okay. And the 75% came from?
The conservators weighed in on that component.
Okay, we'll see how it comes out. Great, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Trustee Nygaard.
Thank you. I have a question for our superintendent, since this is the first time we're really talking about this with you. The board owns the constraints and the goals. The superintendent owns the progress measures. Since we're voting on these progress measures for these two constraints tonight, do you feel when you look at, and I'm not asking about, the details of the numbers, but just, what we're looking at with these progress measures, that they are, in your mind, going to best tell you that we are achieving the spirit of these constraints?
I do feel like they're appropriate and will give us the opportunity to ensure that we're watching the progress, the growth as it should happen over the course of the year.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Trustee Cruz.
Thank you. In an explanatory sheet for each of the new progress or the new targets, it says that these are designed to challenge the administration. Can you please explain that with evidence for each of these progress measures that are being edited?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, many of them are new processes. So by definition, they're challenging administration because they are new. Specifically around constraint 1, we haven't really looked necessarily at targeting specific student populations and tying it to teacher appraisals. And so finding that evidence in how teachers are appraised in student achievement. We look at student outcomes, but we're not necessarily tying it to students. So again, a new process, new opportunities for how we support teachers, and tying it to those specific student populations. The numbers are challenging the organization. Even with constraint 1, looking at only a few points, there are so many moving parts with campuses setting their own schedules, hiring their own teachers. And so we have to, in this current environment, we had to take that into consideration as well. And so it is a challenge because of decentralization with campuses deciding, what those schedules look like. So, so that is for constraint 1. For constraint 4, again, it's a stretch because, as we know, we are implementing new practices and processes with special education services. And so being able to monitor these pieces is a new step. And we started that step with that department this year. And it's a stretch. It's why on the presentation we talked about one of the next steps is supporting campus staff with time management, because it's learning how this monitoring ultimately impacts positively student outcomes in the area of special education services. The targets are a stretch because we're starting at zero. We're starting from scratch. And so we want to make sure to ensure that students are receiving what they need. We want those targets to be high in a stretch. Constraint 5, we talked a little bit about that in the past with specifically around the number of students enrolled in pre-K, our challenges of bringing kids back from a COVID year, as well as just the facility limitations. And so having a larger number is going to force us to kind of look at what we need to do with facilities and also our strategies, which are already happening to bring pre-K students back. And then constraint progress measure 5.2 is a stretch because we were at 15-1, getting our classroom levels down to 11-1 takes commitment from a financial standpoint and a commitment from a program standpoint to get that there. So it's a charge that, with y'all's approval, is one that we'll take on and is a stretch.
Thank you.
Trustee Hernandez?
Thank you. I do want to say that I do love constraint progress measure 5.2, the 15-1 to 11-1. My question is about 5.1. I thought that we were closing pre-Ks this past year so that we could increase more seats in HISD pre-Ks and kindergarten. How many seats did we gain?
I don't have that off the top of my head. Dr. Cruz, do you?
We would have to pull that information, Trustee Hernandez.
Okay, because I see that it looks like we're increasing 6,663 students, but in the 1920 school year, we had 31,000. So we're going from, I know that we lost a lot of students during COVID, but we're essentially trying to increase the number of pre-K and kindergarten students by less than 500 students in the next few years.
Well, if I may point out, Trustee Hernandez, there are some major challenges that Dr. Matney referenced. Quite frankly, right now, facility is a major challenge. We have certain parts of town where there is huge demand for pre-K, but no capacity from a facility perspective. HERC recently did a study that showed that the number one most important factor that HISD families were looking at in terms of pre-K, enrolling their child in pre-K, was the distance from their home. If it was outside of a 1.5 mile radius, their chances of enrolling were very, very low. So we have a challenge. I know the superintendent has referenced this in the past around just facility and capacity to be able to bring on more pre-Kers. And of course, right now we're seeing, as with the overall drop in enrollment in the district, that is happening at the younger grade levels. And we've talked about various contributing factors, including demographic information that's showing that people are having fewer kids, at least within the city boundaries, right? So there are variables that are within our control and some that are outside of our control. And I think right now with COVID, frankly, a lot of the parents, what we're hearing is they're nervous about sending their smaller children, their pre-K children to school, and they're choosing to keep them home. So I say all of this because we, of course, want to capture as many pre-Kers as we know the value of early childhood education, but we also face some major challenges right now that we're going to have to address.
Yeah, so can you explain to me how less than 500 students in a couple of years is an ambitious goal, especially with the fact that we closed other pre-K schools so that we could have more seats in HISD?
We can always revisit that number. I think we were again looking at all the big picture kind of immediate things that had to happen, whether that's bond at some point to talk about facility increase. Again, the kind of factors that are outside of our control, we can certainly, if it's the will of the board, to make that recommendation to the superintendent that we revisit kind of what our goals and targets are around that. I can tell you our commitment right now is to do everything that we possibly can to enroll pre-Kers. Going back to the ESSER plan, part of the funds were actually intended to go immediately to start putting together a team that's going out into the community, paying actually parent ambassadors to go into the apartment complexes, to go into the neighborhoods, the fiestas, the churches, and actually try to convince. We've been doing that recently, in fact, very successfully. We've been going through food towns every weekend. We actually have set up tables, meeting parents where they're at, and it's actually been very successful. People are actually on the spot, they're like, what is this about? And they've been enrolling pre-K. So I feel that we can do a lot, especially with the ESSER funds, to actually do more of that type of work to enroll. But I also don't want to discount some of the challenges, some structural challenges that we have and opportunities that we have, I think, to do some things to really increase the number significantly. But your point is noted, Trustee Hernandez. I can see why you're concerned that's not enough. We all want to see much more than that. And so again, if we need to revisit that target, that's something that we certainly can do so.
Those are all my questions.
Seeing no other. Trustee Song, are you on?
Same item, please. Yeah, to follow on Trustee Hernandez's comments, I will say that 5.1 is the metric where I also feel the most uncomfortable. And so what would be a reasonable time frame for you to bring this back to us, having either firmed up that number with more information for us to really understand why that's a stretch, or to take one more look at it and see if we could stretch a little bit more? Next week, next month?
We'd be glad to bring this back next month with that additional insight needed. I think it's a combination of not only, developing a stretch goal, but, we're in the midst of bond conversation as well. We could very easily look at being bold and doing something different in bond, but that would have to happen pretty quick because we have preliminary bond plans that we're looking at right now. But we definitely could bring it back a month from now.
Okay, I move to postpone this item to our September board meeting.
Second.
Please vote.
We postpone it to next month with the request that we revisit constraint 5, progress measure 5.1.
Eight, 4, 0 against. Trustee Song?
Thank you. I'd like to pull item E1, please. And it's for the reason that we received an email from a constituent with new information about, at least new to this trustee, with regards to item E1.
Did you?
Trustee Sung, can I ask a question before we do that? Do you mind, Dr. Allen, Trustee Sung? Where are we with the student speakers? Are they still going to speak? And is there anybody for the hearing of citizen? Because I think people have to go to work and go to school tomorrow. So.
Are those students?
Oh, read them. Is
that speakers? Those young men right there?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, and then just, if we can move up the hearing of citizens soon, so that way whomever is still here to speak, it's 11 o'clock. Thank you. That's all, whenever y'all get a chance to it.
Trustee Sung, did you need to make a motion?
I move that we pull item E1.
Do I have a second?
Yeah, I move that we pull E1 from the consent agenda. E is an elephant.
Please vote. Yes. Trustee Cruz? Seven, for, one against.
I'd like to go into closed session to discuss this.
The board will now adjourn to closed session in the Board Service Conference Room under Chapter 551 of Texas Government Code, Open Meetings Act, subsections 071, 072, 073, 074, 076, 082, 0821, 083, 084, and 089. Should board final action, vote, or decision on any matter considered in the closed session be required, such final action, vote, or decision shall be taken at the open meeting covered by this notice upon the reconvening of this public meeting or the subsequent public meeting of the board upon notice thereof. The board has adjourned to closed session at 11:06 p.m.